The Count's Chauffeur by William Le Queux. Number 5. The 6 New Novels. The car had again undergone a transformation. With a new racing body built in Northampton and painted in white picked out of the gilt, no one would have recognized it as the car which had carried away the clever jewel thief from Bond Street. Since the adventure of Leghorn, I had seen nothing of La Belle Valentine. With Bindo, however, I had driven the car across from Rome to Chalaille by the Ventimiglia and to Marseille, and after crossing the Channel, I had gone alone to Northampton, and there awaited the making of the smart new racing body. Count Bindo de Ferrari, who seemed ever on the move with an eye open for a good thing, wrote me from Ilfracombe, Southampton, Manchester, Perth, Aberdeen, and other places, remitting me the necessary money and urging me to push on the work, as he wanted the car again immediately. At last, when it was finished, I drove it to the garage I knew to be in the back of Regent Street. The same evening, met him at the Automobile Club. At his request, I dressed smartly and gave no outward appearance of the chauffeur. Therefore, he invited me to dine, and afterwards, while we sat alone in the corner of the smoking room, he began to unfold a series of plans for the future. They were, however, hazy, and only conveyed to me an idea that they were going on a long tour of England. I ventured to remark that to be in England after the little affair of the Bond Street might be somewhat dangerous. He replied, however, in his usual nonchalant air, "My dear Ewert, there's not the slightest fear. Act as I bid, and trust in me. Tomorrow at 11 we go north together, and to Yorkshire. You will be my servant again after tonight. You understand, right?" "Perfectly. Shall we start from here?" "Yes, but before we set out, I can only warn you that you will want all of your wits about you this time. If we have any luck, we shall bring off a big thing. A very big thing." "And if we have no luck?" Well, we shan't bring it off, that's all," he laughed. "Where are we going?" "Yorkshire, to spend a week at the seaside. It will do us both good. I've decided that the Scarborough air will be extremely beneficial to us. One of our friends is already there, at the Grand." "Sir Charles?" "Exactly. He's very fond of Scarborough. He likes the church parade on Sundays, the music on the spa, and all that kind of thing. So we'll join him. I wonder if we shall get through in a day." "We ought to, with luck," was my response. Then, after urging me to leave everything in his hands, he told me that I'd better get early to bed, and thoroughly overhaul the car next early morning before starting. So next day at 10, he took his seat by my side outside the club in Piccadilly, and we drove away in the traffic towards Regent's Park, on our way to that much overrated highway, the Great North Road. The day was warm and dusty. As it was Saturday, there were police traps out everywhere. Therefore, progress was slow, for I was forced at every few miles to slow down to escape a £10 fine. Leafy Hatfield, Crooked Hitchin, quaint old Stamford, we passed until we swung into the yard of the Angel, that antique and comfortable hotel known to the motorists at Grantham, where we had a hasty meal.
Who are you?
Then out again in sunset, we headed through Doncaster to York, and in the darkness, with our big headlight shining, we tore through Malton and slipped down the hill into Scarborough. The run had been a long and dusty one, the last 50 miles in darkness and at a high speed. Therefore, when we pulled up before the Grand, I leaned heavily upon the steering wheel, weary and fagged. It was about 11 o'clock at night, and Sir Charles, who had evidently been expecting our arrival in the big hall of the hotel, rushed out and greeted Bindo effusively. Then, directed by a page boy who sat in the Count's seat, I took the round the Hutton's garage, close by. With Sir Charles, I noticed another man, young, with very fair hair, a mere boy, he seemed, in evening clothes of the latest cut. When I returned to the hotel, I saw them all seated in the big hall over whiskeys and sodas, laughing merrily together. It was late, and all the other guests had retired. Next day, Bindo took the young man, whose name I discovered to be Paul Clayton, for a run on the car to Braddleton. Bindo drove, and I sat upon the step. The racing body gave the 40 a rakish appearance, and each time we went up and down the esplanade or across the valley bridge, we created a considerable interest. After lunch, we went on to Hornsey and returned to Scarborough at tea time. That same evening, after dinner, I saw Bindo's new friend walking on the esplanade with a fair-haired, well-dressed young girl. They were deep in conversation, and it struck me that she was warning him regarding something. Days passed, warm, idle August days. Scarborough was full of visitors. The Grand was overrun by a smartly dressed crowd, and the spa was a picturesque sight during the morning promenade. The beautiful Belvedere grounds were a blaze of roses, and being private property, they regarded with envy by thousands who trod the esplanade and esplanade. Almost daily, Bindo took Paul for a run in the car. To York, to Castle Howard, to Dreffel, to Whitby we went. The road in the last named place, by the way, was expressible. Evidently, Bindo's present object was to ingratiate on the young Clayton, but with what ulterior motive I could not conceive. Sir Charles remained constantly in the background, well-dressed and highly respectable. He presented a rather superior air, and walked on the spot at certain hours, establishing a kind of custom from which he did not depart. He had now changed his name to Sinclair, while Bindo Ferraris went under the less foreign cognomen of Albert Cornforth. I alone kept my own name, George Ewert. As day succeeded day, I kept wondering in what was really in the wind. Why were they so friendly with Paul Clayton? Of one fact I felt assured, and it was that the jewels were no mere object of manure on this occasion. That Bindo and his friends had laid some deep plot was, of course, quite certain, but the Count never took me into his confidence until the last moment, when the coup was made. Therefore, try how I would not discover the intentions of the gang. From Leghorn to Scarborough is a far cry. At least we were safe from detection for all our little business affairs, save for that of the Bond Street jewelers. Continually I reflected on our description had been circulated by the police, and that some enterprising constable or detective might pick us upon us in the office chance of being correct. Count Bindo, or Albert Cornforth, as he was now known, was having a most excellent time. He soon grew to know many people in the hotel, and being essentially a ladies' man, was greatly in request at the dances. Continually he apologized to the ladies for being unable to take them motoring, but, as he explained, the space on a racing car is limited. Thus a fortnight passed. Round at the garage were a number of cars from London, Manchester, and elsewhere, and I soon grew friendly with several expert chauffeurs. Two of them were old friends. One day, Bindo and I had been to the Harrogate, dined at the Majestic, and returned. After taking the car to the garage, I went out for a turn along the esplanade in order to stretch my legs. It was midnight, brightly starlit, and silent save for the low slowing of the waves on the shore. I had lit my pipe and walked nearly to the Holbeck Gardens at the extreme end of the south cliff, when, in the darkness, I discerned two figures sitting upon a seat in the shadows. One was a man, and the other a woman in a light evening dress, with a wrap thrown over her head and shoulders. As I passed, I managed to get a glimpse of their faces. The one was Paul Clayton, and the other the pretty, fair-haired young woman I had seen him with before. They were sitting with the attitude of lovers. He held her hand, and, I believe, was just raising it to his lips. I hurried on, annoyed with myself for being so inquisitive, but the beautiful face of the girl became impressed upon my memory. Count Bindo, the nonchalant, audacious cosmopolitan who spent money so freely, was a veritable marvel of cleverness and cunning in all matters of chicanery and fraud. He was evidently a man who, though still young, had a pretty dark record, but what had really been carefully concealed from me. I can only admit that I had now become an adventurer like the others, for in each case I had received a certain portion of the profits of the coups, which had assisted each other in effecting. True, we lived a full life of excitement and change, but it was a life I liked, for at heart I was nothing if not a wanderer and adventurer. I liked adventure for adventure's sake, and cared nothing for the constant peril of detection. Strange how easily one can be enticed from a life of honesty into one of fraud, especially if the inducements are held out and are adequate compens for any qualm of conscience. The actions of our friend, Sir Charles Blythe, were also rather puzzling. He seemed to be taking no part in whatever scheme was in progress. If I met him in public on the Esplanade or elsewhere, I saluted him as a chauffeur should. But when we met unobserved, I was his equal, and on several occasions I made inquiries which he refused to satisfy. We had been nearly 3 weeks in Scarborough when, after dinner one evening, in the big hall of the hotel, I saw an audacious Bindo seated drinking coffee with a queer little wizened face and rather overdressed old lady, towards whom he seemed to be particularly polite. She was evidently one of those wrinkled, yellow-toothed old tabbies who still believe themselves to be attractive, for, as I watched covertly, I saw how she assumed various poses for the benefit of those seated in her vicinity. Though so strikingly dressed in a gown laced with beautiful old lace, she wore no jewelry save her wedding rings. Her airs and mannerisms were, however, amusing, and quickly made it apparent that she moved in a good set. From the hall porter I presently learned that she was Mrs. Clayton of St. Mellon's Hall, near Petersburg, the widow of a wealthy old man cotton spinner, who generally spent a month at that hotel each year. "She's a quaint old girl," he informed me in confidence. "Thinks no one of herself, and always trying to hang on to some woman with a title, even if she's only a knight's wife. Still, some ill-natured woman has nicknamed her the Chameleon, because she changes her dresses so often, and is so fond of bright colors. She's a good old sport," he added, "always pretty free with her tips. Her son lives here, too." Whoever or whatever she was, it was evident that Bindo was busily ingratiating himself to her, having previously established a firm friendship with her son, who, by the way, had left Scarborough on the previous day. I happened to have a friend who was a chauffeur to a doctor in Peterborough, therefore I wrote to him that evening making inquiries regarding St. Mellon's and its owner. 3 days later, a reply came to the effect that the hall was about 10 miles from Peterborough, and one of the finest country seats in Northamptonshire. It had been the property of a well-known earl who, having become impoverished by gambling, had sold it, together with the great estate, to old Joshua Clayton, a Lancashire millionaire. "She keeps a couple of cars," my friend concluded. "One is a Humber Vitorette, and the other a 24 Mercedes. You know her chauffeur, Saunders, from the Napier Works." Of course I knew Saunders. He was once a very intimate friend of mine, but for the past couple of years I had lost sight of him. Why, I wondered, was Bindo intensely interested in the overdressed old crone? He walked with her constantly to the spa along the Esplanade. He lounged with her outside when she sat in the parading summer girls and their flirtations, and he idled at coffee with her every evening. After a few days, Sir Charles Blythe, alias Sinclair, was introduced. By prearranging, the bogus baronet chanced to be standing in the railings looking over the spa grounds one morning when Bindo and his companion strolled by. The men saluted each other, and Bindo asked Miss Clayton to leave to introduce his friend. The instant the magic title was spoken, the old lady became full of smiles and graces, and the trio, walking together, passed along in the direction of the hold-up. 2 days later, Henderson appeared on the scene quite suddenly. I was walking along Westborough late one evening when somebody accosted me, and turning, I found it was our old friend, whom I believed was to be still on the continent. He was dressed as foppishly as usual, and certainly betrayed no evidence that he was a crook. "Well, Ewert," he asked, "and how goes things? Who's this old crone we've got into? And soft thing, Bindo says." I told him that all I knew concerning her, and he appeared to be reassured. He had taken a room at the Grand, he told me, and I afterwards found on the following morning that Bindo pretended to discover him at the hotel, and introduced him to the unsuspecting old lady as Lord Kellam. Mrs. Clayton was delighted at thus extending her acquaintanceship to England's bluest blood. That same afternoon, the old lady, who seemed to be rather a sporting turn of mind, expressed a desire to ride upon his racing car. Therefore I brought around the 40, and Bindo drove her over to Malton, where we had tea, and a quick run back to the evening. And there were no police traps on the road between Scarborough and York, therefore we were able to put on a move, and the old lady expressed the keenest delight at going so fast. As I sat upon the step at her feet, she seemed constantly alarmed lest I should fall off. "My own cars never go so quickly," she declared. "My man drives at a snail's pace." "Probably because you have no traps in Northamptonshire," Bindo replied. "There are always lurking constables in the Great North Road, and always leading, but you must let me come take you at your driver's place for a little while. If the cars are worth anything at all, I'll get the last mile out of them." "I only wish you would come to pay me a visit, Mr. Cornforth. I should be very delighted. Do you shoot?" "A little," Bindo answered. "My friend Sir Charles Sinclair is said to be one of the best shots in England, but I'm not much of a shot myself." "Then can't you persuade him to come with you?" "Well, I'll ask him," my employer replied. "He has very many engagements, however. He's so well known, you see." "He'll come if you persuade him, I'm sure," the old lady said, with that she believed to be a winning smile. "You can drive my Mercedes, and he can shoot. I always have a house party through September. You must both be there to join it. I'll make you as comfortable as I can in my humble home. Paul will be at home." "Humble, Miss Clayton? Why, I have years heard the St. Mellons spoke of as one of the show hosts of Midlands." "You've heard an exaggeration, my dear Mr. Cornforth," was her response as she laughed lightly. "Remember, I shall expect you, and you can bring your own car if you like. Our roads are fairly good, you'll find." Bindo accepted with profuse thanks and shot me a glance by which I knew that he had advanced one step further towards consummation of his secret intentions, whatever they were. Sir Charles would, no doubt, go with us. What, I wondered, was intended. 3 weeks later, we arrived one evening at St. Mellons, and I found it to be a magnificent old Tudor mansion in the center of a lordly domain, and approached from the high road by a great beech avenue nearly a mile in length. The old wing of the house, part of an ancient Gothic abbey, was ivy-covered, while in front of the place was a great lake, originally a fish pond of the Carmelite monks. It wanted an hour before dinner when we arrived, and at the sound of our horn, nearly a dozen men and women from the house party came forth to greet us. "They seem a pretty smart crowd," remarked Bindo under his breath to Sir Charles, seated beside him. "Yes, but we'll want our wits when the time's about us," replied the other. "I hear that the wife of Gilling, the jeweler of Bond Street, is here with her daughter. Suppose her husband takes it into his head to run down here for the weekend." "We won't suppose anything of the sort, my dear fellow. I always hate supposing. It's a bad habit when you've got your living to earn, as we have." And with these words, he ran along the main entrance and pulled up sharply, being greeted by her hostess herself, who, in a cream serge dress, stood upon the steps and shouted us a warm welcome. My two friends were quickly introduced by Paul to the assembled party, while several of the men came around the car to admire it, one of them questioning me as to its horsepower, its make, and other details, inquiries which showed his ignorance. Around the garage I found my friend Saunders, and later he took me over the splendid old place, filled as it was with relics of the noble, but now decadent English family. My eyes and ears were opened everywhere. The house party, numbering 18, consisted mostly of the par food sets, people who, having made money by trade, were attempting to pass as country families. The men possessed for the most part an air of the city, and the womenkind were painfully smart without the good breeding necessary to carry it off. After dinner, under the guidance of Saunders, I managed to get a glimpse of the great hall, where the party had assembled for coffee. There was a fine, lofty, oak-paneled old place, once the refectory of the monks, and with great Gothic windows of stained glass, antique cabinets, and stands of armor. Against the dark oak, from floor to ceiling, the dresses of women showed well, and amid the laughter and chatter I saw the gay, careless Bindo, a very well set up, manly figure against his evening clothes, standing beside his hostess, chatting and laughing with her, while Sir Charles was bending over a chair of a pretty fair-haired girl in turquoise, whom I recognized as the same girl I had seen with Paul in Scarborough. Her name was Ethel Gilling, Saunders said, and told me that the young Clayton was, in secret, deeply in love with her. Would her father arrive and put a temporary end to our conspiracy? I feared that he might. Saunders asked me a good deal about my birth and position, and I fancy he envied me. He did not know that I had become a crook like my master, but believed me to be a mere chauffeur whose duties took him hither and thither across Europe. No chauffeur can bear private service of a cheap car in a circumscribed area. Every man who drives a motor car, whether master or servant, longs for wide touring and high-powered cars. Contrary to Bindo's declaration, he proved to be a very good shot, while Sir Charles provoked the admiration of all the men when, next morning, they went forth in search of birds. That same afternoon, Bindo drove the Mercedes containing Mrs. Clayton and 3 ladies of the party, while I drove one of the men, a Captain Holliday, in our own car, and we went all over the ruins of the Crowland Abbey. Saunders had told me that he had never driven the Mercedes to her full power, and his mistress was so nervous. But with Bindo driving, the old lady now seemed to want to go faster and faster. Our car was, of course, the more powerful, and ere we had gone 10 miles, I put on full speed and passed my master with ease, arriving at Crowland fully 20 minutes before him. It was, however, very apparent that Bindo, the good-looking adventurer, had wormed himself entirely into the chameleon's good graces. Both he and Holliday escorted the ladies over the ruins, and after tea at the old-fashioned George, we made a quick and enjoyable run home at sunset by the way of Paintersborough, Castor, and Wansford. The autumn days went by, and amid such pleasant surroundings, our visit was proving a most merry one. Yet, try how I would, I could not see what Bindo and his friend intended. The girl in turquoise who flirted so outrageously with young Clayton was, I discovered, also very friendly with Sir Charles. Then I saw that his partiality towards her was a distinct object, namely, in order to be aware of her father's movements. Truly, Bindo and Blythe were past masters of the art of genteel scoundrelism, adventurers of the very first water. They seldom, if ever, let me into their secrets until the plans were actually matured. Their reason for this reticence was that they believed I might show a white feather. They could not yet rely upon my audacity or courage. Within a week, Bindo was the most popular man at the house party, the humorist of the dinner table, and extremely expert in practical jokes, of which many were being played. One half of the party being pitted against the other half, as is often the case. In the servants' hall, we were also having a pretty merry time. Medhurst, the maid of Mrs. Clayton, was a particularly prepossessing young woman, and I had many chats and a few walks with her. From her, at Bindo's instigation, I learned a good deal regarding the mistress's habits and tastes, all of which I, in due course, reported to my master. A shrewd girl was Medhurst. However, I was compelled to exercise a good deal of judicious tact in putting my questions to her. One evening, however, while sitting alone in the park smoking just before going to bed, I saw Bindo himself strolling at her side. She was speaking softly, but what about I could not make out. They were in a part of the park into which the guests never went, and it seemed as though she had kept a secret tryst. Not wishing to disturb them, I slipped away unobserved. Next morning, Paul Clayton went up to London, in order to see his mother's solicitors, and that same afternoon, about 4 o'clock, Mrs. Clayton received a very urgent telegram to come at once, as her lawyers desired some instructions immediately. The message she received evidently caused her a very great deal of anxiety, for she took Medhurst and drove in the Mercedes to Petersburg Station, where she caught the up express at 7 o'clock. She had apologized to her house party for her absence, explained the urgency of her presence in London, and promised to be back in time for dinner on tomorrow. She left the hall at 6:30. At 7, Bindo called me out of the servants' hall and whispered, "Hold yourself in readiness. Go to my room at 9 punctually, and you'll find on the table half a dozen novels done up in a strap. Just take them carefully and put them in the car, and then get away, first to Northampton to change the body, and then to Harwich. Wait for me at the Eastern Hotel. Name Parker. Take care of the books. I shall give you other instructions before people presently, but take no notice of them. I'll join you as soon as it's safe." And with that, he turned upon his heel and left me. The dressing gong was just sounding as I walked across the garage in order to look through the car and charge the lamps, and prior to my night journey. I was wondering what was about to happen. That some coup was to be made that night was evident. I spent half an hour in the car, and had all in order when the servant came to say my master wanted me. I found Bindo in the hall, laughing gaily with some ladies, prior to going to dinner. "Oh, Ewert," he said as I entered, "I want you to run the car to Birmingham tonight, and bring Cole Folding here tomorrow. You know where he lives, at Woodford Park. He's expecting you. The roads are all right, and you'll make good time. You'd better get a couple of outer covers, too, when you're there. You'll bring the Colonel back in time for dinner tomorrow. You understand?" "Yes, sir," I replied, and bowing went out, while with the ladies he turned in the direction of the dining room. I idled about the stable clock was just on the point of striking 9, when I made my way to the servants' staircase to my master's room. In the corridor was semi-darkness. I rapped, but there was no one there, and I entered and switched on the light. There on the table I found a small pile of new, cloth-bound 6-shilling novels, held together with a strap of webbing, such as lawyers use when they tie up their papers. I took them up, switched off the light, and carried them downstairs to the car, which I had previously brought out in the stable yard. My lamps were already lit, and I was in the act of putting on the frieze coat when Saunders, driving the Mercedes, passed me, going towards the main entrance of the hall. He had a passenger, a guest from the station, judging by his dress. The stranger descended from the car, and the lights over the steps revealed his face. I started. It was the jeweler I had spoken to in Bond Street, the man I had taken for the manager, but was none other than Mr. Gilling himself. I saw that all was lost. In a few moments he would come face to face with Bindo. In an instant, however, I had made up my mind and re-entered the house and made my way quickly through the large hall, but Gilling was already there, kissing his wife and daughter. I glanced round, but was reassured to see both Bindo and Sir Charles were absentees. Did they know about the arrival of Gilling? I ran up to the rooms of both my friends and could not find them. In Bindo's room, a dress coat had been thrown upon the bed. He had changed since I had been up there for the books. Alarmed by the news of the jeweler's arrival, they had, in all probability, hurriedly changed and slipped away. Therefore, I ran down to the car, and telling Saunders I was off to Birmingham and should return tomorrow, I ran quietly down the long, dark avenue. From St. Mellons to Harwich, as a crow flies, is about 130 miles. First, however, I went to Northampton and put on the previous body of the car. Then the road I took was by Huntingdon, Cambridge, Halstead, and Chauffeur. In all, about 170 miles. The night was dark, and the roads were in fairly good condition. Therefore I went at as high speed as I dare, full of wonder to what had really happened. Bindo's dress coat on the bed showed that he had left, therefore I had every hope they had not been recognized by the jeweler. After I had changed the body at coach builders in Northampton, the run to Essex coast proved an exciting one, for I had one narrow escape at the level crossing. But to give the details of the journey would serve no purpose. Suffice it to say, I duly arrived at the Great Eastern Hotel at Harwich next morning, and registered there in the name of Parker. Then I waited in patience until 2 days later I received a note from Bindo and met him at some distance from the hotel. His personal appearance had altered greatly, and he was as shabbily dressed as a chauffeur. "By Jove," he said when we were alone, "we've had a narrow squeak. We had no idea that the Henderson sent a telegram to London calling for the old crone to come down to Gilling had been invited. We only heard of this impending arrival the very moment we were bringing off the coup. Then instead of remaining there, becoming indignant, and assisting the police, we were compelled to fly, and thus gave away the whole game. If we had stayed, Gilling would have recognized us, by Jove. I'd never had such a tough quarter of an hour in all my life. Both had gone up to Scotland, and we shall ship the car across to Hamburg to the night's boat by Parkinson. You've got those books all right. Don't lose them." "I've left them in the car," I replied. "Left them in the car?" he cried. "Are you mad?" "Mad? Why?" "Go up and get them at once, and lock them up in your bag. I'll show you something when we have the opportunity." The opportunity came 3 days later, when we were alone together in a room at Hoffer's Hotel in the Bahnhof's Platz in Hamburg. He took the books from me and undid the buckle. In my surprise, he showed me that the centers of popular books were cleverly cut out, so that they were literally boxes formed by the paper leaves. With each book was filled with splendid jewels. The haul was a huge one, for several of the diamond ornaments which had been taken from the chameleon's safe were of enormous value. The old lady was passionately fond of jewelry, and spent some sums with Mr. Gilling. We afterwards discovered that several of the finest pieces we had taken had actually been sent to her on approval by Gilling, so curiously enough, we had touched on his property on the second occasion. It was a difficult affair, Bindo declared. I had to pretend to make love to Medhurst, or I should have never been able to get a castle safe key. However, we've been able to take the best of the old lady's collection, and I'll fetch a good price of Amsterdam, where I'm a Dutchman myself. Of course, it's a big hue and cry after us, so we must frankly lie low for a fair bit. Fancy your leaving those novels ticking about the car. Someone might have wanted to read them.